Hello, I'm S.R. Staley, and I'm the author of several books, including most recently A Warrior's Soul, which will be published in July of 2011. It's the first of a series that I've planned called the Path of the Warrior series, and it really talks about kids growing up in middle school and how they deal with violence and gangs and bullying, and it has a martial arts theme. And what I'd like to do today is talk about that martial arts theme. In particular, one of the things that is crucial in the plot of A Warrior's Soul, and the lead character, who is Luke, who has some training in martial arts, is the difference between what we learn in the classroom, or in the dojo in the case of learning martial arts, and what you do in the real world. In fact, I would say that that is probably the central question in this book that Luke has to deal with. He has almost 3 years of training in martial arts, but he doesn't think he can actually apply it in the real world, which makes him weak, which actually makes him a target for the bullies in his school and the gang. And this is interesting because I study martial arts as well, and this is something I'm always asking myself. Are the skills that I'm learning in the classroom really going to be effective in the real world? Will I be able to throw a punch? Will I be able to kick in the right way to really get myself out of a pretty nasty situation? And part of what I'm doing in this book is showing that just because you learn something in the dojo doesn't mean it's actually going to work in the real world, in the same way that in the classroom, just because someone teaches you a theory, like a math, like how to do a problem, doesn't mean you can actually go out in the real world and try it. And actually have it work. But if you learn it correctly in the real world and you practice and you're able to develop those skills and you learn that in the classroom, then when you go into the real world, you'll be able to apply it in ways that you didn't think even possible. So in many ways, what I'm doing with the martial arts and with this question of form, and martial arts are talking about the form, what does that punch look like? You don't really go in real time when you do the cross punch or the lead punch. You actually try to make sure you're throwing a punch that will be true, that will hit the target, that will have the power that you need. And you do a lot of just building up of skills in the same way if you're playing on the soccer field. You kick over and over again, trying to get into the goal, or you try and throw a basketball into a hoop over and over again. Because when it comes to game time, you need to be in a position where you're not even thinking about how those skills can be used and applied. And that really becomes central, because as Luke is trying to deal with the bullies, and he's thinking about all the things that he has learned in the dojo, what he then has to face in the climax is whether or not those applications will work. I'll leave it to you to read the book to know whether it does, but I'll tell you this, it doesn't work the way Luke thinks it'll work. And that, again, is very much like the real world. We learn skills, we learn things in the classroom. Very often in the real world, we have to improvise. And what I found happening is that made a really interesting book to write about that, particularly in the context of martial arts, because things aren't nearly as neat in the real world when you're faced with real problems, but somehow you've got to get through it. You need to solve the problem. And it's this difference between form and actuality. And that actually becomes a source of conflict throughout the book. And it comes to a resolution which I hope has a reasonably happy ending, but it also can be a little frustrating, but it sets up a lot of really interesting problems for the lead characters as well as the people they're trying to defend themselves against. Thank you very much for listening to me on this round of my video log.